Small form factor PCs are difficult enough to build as it is, so who would be stupid enough to try to build one with 20-year-old parts? Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. Some of you might remember back to last month when I tried building a small form factor retro gaming PC off a random thin client I picked up on eBay for $25. You also might remember it didn't go so well. This is one of the longest projects that I've ever embarked on Craft Computing, aside from the cloud gaming server. I've been working on this literally for about 6 months, off and on, buying hardware and testing different configurations. The hardware that I've gathered today will hopefully solve all of the issues that plagued my previous attempt at a retro gaming PC, like the overheating, the slow storage, the fact that only 1 out of the 3 graphics cards that I bought actually fit in the case. Yeah, it wasn't a successful project. Now, building an ITX PC is usually difficult enough already, but trying to build one with hardware that wasn't even around when ITX first became an ATX standard, well, that's just kinda crazy. Rather than scouring the internet for another 6 months looking for a Socket 370 ITX motherboard, which I know exists, and number 2, if you happen to have one, get in touch with me. I'm interested. Rather than going that route, I decided to go with more of a retro rocket build, that is, using a slightly more modern platform that has modern conveniences, and then adding in PCI cards that happen to be compatible with Windows 98. So what do we have on the docket for today? Well, my motherboard of choice is going to be the MSI Wind D510, and like the name might imply, this is using an Atom D510 dual-core processor running at 1.6 GHz. While a lot of people may scoff at building a gaming PC with an Atom processor, keep in mind that even a single core of the CPU is still about 20% faster than a Pentium 3 1.4 GHz Tualatin chip, which means it has plenty of horsepower for anything from back in that day. For memory, I'm going with 2 1GB sticks of G.Skill DDR2 running at 533 MHz. Now again, not the fastest memory in the world, nor is this board even capable of running dual channel, but I figured if I have 2 DIMM slots, I might as well fill them up. One of the advantages of going with a non-period correct motherboard is the addition of SATA slots on board, because SATA wasn't even around during the Windows 98 days. Which means, instead of having to wire up an old ATA hard drive, instead I can use a 100% brand new SATA SSD. When it comes to graphics cards, there are actually a ton of options that you can go with and maintain Windows 98 compatibility. Unfortunately, almost none of them will work with an ITX motherboard which only has a PCI slot on it. You see, AGP was all the rage in the latter days of Windows 98, and by the time Windows XP came around, we had already moved on to PCI Express. PCI graphics cards were still manufactured through the mid-2000s, but unfortunately they were pretty much relegated to the lowest-end models, and the most recent NVIDIA card that you can pick up is the GeForce 6200, which is what I have right here. Now make no mistake, the GeForce 6200 is still almost twice as fast as the next closest competitor in the GeForce FX 5500. But unfortunately, that's not saying much because the FX 5500 was an absolute dog on arrival. As far as ATI goes, you could pick up a Radeon 9500, which I do have, and unfortunately I killed in my last retro gaming PC due to it overheating, and I still haven't recapped it, so that one was a no-go. You could also jump up one more generation with ATI and go with a Radeon X300, X550, or even an X800, so long as you can find one in a PCI slot. Unfortunately, probably 95% of them were made with AGP and PCI Express, so getting a hold of one of those is kind of like finding a unicorn. If you had a motherboard with an AGP slot on it, you could easily go all the way up to a GeForce 7950X. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as an ITX motherboard with an AGP slot, again because ITX didn't become a standard until 2002. If I were to concede and build this thing in a micro ATX form factor, I could very easily pick up a faster graphics card and some more compatible hardware. But size is of the utmost importance here, as I've already got a ton of full ATX towers, and I didn't want another one just cluttering up my garage. I wanted something that I could actually keep in here, sit on my desk, and play retro games with. When building a Windows 98 retro PC, there are usually 2 things that you have to have: a CD drive and a floppy drive. My build is going to have neither because, again, space is of the utmost importance, and I don't need the CD-ROM drive taking up just as much space as my motherboard does. So while I'm not quite going to make it down to the thin client size, I'm going to come as close as I can, starting with this case right here. This is the ZenZone Art A1 ITX case, and it is a thing of beauty. The outside of the case is one single piece of aluminum starting at 1 foot, wrapping all the way around the top and going to the other. And I really appreciate the Mac Pro aesthetic that they put on the top of it. Inside the case, there is room for an ITX motherboard, as well as 2 PCI expansion slots. More on those in just a minute. Each side of the case is held on with 4 screws, and once removed, the panel just lifts right off. Just like that. Now, this case was obviously meant for a much more modern build, with a single USB 3.0 header, as well as an included PCI Express riser. But as we're using PCI, we're not going to need that. Features on the inside of the case are pretty much what I listed for features on the outside of the case, as in there's not much more inside. There's the single USB 3.0 header, and there's a mounting plate for a single 2.5-inch SSD. There are no fan mounts, there are no additional USB ports, there's really nothing else to speak of, and in fact, even the power supply in this is a little bit special. This is what's known as a Flex ATX power supply, and they're most commonly used in one-use servers. This particular unit is a 270 watt and actually has an 80+ rating. As this case does not have your traditional PCI expansion slot, that is a slot that is perpendicular to the motherboard, I instead had to pick up this PCI to PCI extension ribbon, as well as a single PCI to dual PCI expansion card. Unfortunately, this didn't work quite the way I wanted it to. You see, this motherboard was manufactured in 2010, or around 7 years after the end of life for Windows 98, and as such, pretty much everything on it is not Windows 98 compatible, especially the cards that I really need, like audio, Ethernet, and video. So my original plan for this case was to add a 2-port PCI expansion and add in a 3D graphics card, which I've done in the G4 6200, as well as a period correct sound card in the Sound Blaster Audigy 2ZS. Unfortunately, there are a number of problems with this PCI expansion slot when it comes to using it with a new motherboard. I'm gonna sound like a grumpy old man for a minute and say, back in my day, when you plugged in PC cards into a PCI or ISA slot, sometimes you would have to manually configure both the memory resources allocated to actually use the card, as well as the IRQ or the interrupt request of them so the operating system would know where they're at. In modern hardware, that's all handled 100% dynamically by the motherboard and the operating system. But with non-plug-and-play OSs, like Windows 98, Windows Millennium, you had to go in and manually configure those if you had multiple sound cards plugged in, or multiple graphics cards plugged in. So what's the deal? Can't I just disable the onboard audio and use the Sound Blaster Audigy anyway? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. You see, even when I disabled the audio card in BIOS, it seems that those IRQs and memory resources are still hardwired to that particular audio chip, which means plugging this one in will conflict every single time. That is at least when I'm plugging into PCI slot 2. With PCI slot 1, I was able to successfully plug in the Sound Blaster Audigy and have full sound compatibility. Unfortunately, I lost my 3D acceleration, which is kind of important. But any card that I tried, be it the Sound Blaster Audigy or the G4 6200, or even a USB 2.0 card, all of them failed with resource conflicts when plugged into this second slot. So unfortunately, in this case, I had to admit defeat and just move on with the project, which means I'm not going to be able to use this absolutely beautiful piece of a sound card. Instead, I had to use a slightly more modern sound card with a Crystal Media 97 chip on board, and the most readily available sources of those are these Samba USB audio dongles, which are literally just a headphone and microphone jack with a Crystal 97 audio chip on board. Fortunately, these are 100% plug-and-play with Windows 98 and have full Windows audio capabilities. Unfortunately, you lose Sound Blaster 16 support for DOS, so any DOS-based games that you play, you're gonna lose audio on. But hey, if it was DOS gaming that I was after, I would just run it on DOSBox. I'm concerned with Windows here, and I think I have a pretty good set of hardware assembled to make that a reality. So what do you say I stop talking and we just get to the build? And the build is done, and I cannot say enough good things about this case. I absolutely love the looks, the fit and finish. Now, the case is the single most expensive thing about this build. This was $110 when I bought it, although I've seen it come down about $10 in the interim. You can pick it up on Amazon right now for about $99. But it is absolutely wonderful, very compact, and if the size wasn't apparent enough from me opening the box, I hope this gives it a little bit more perspective and scale. It is a tiny, tiny little case. I mean, here it is compared to the thin client that I built in the previous retro PC, and you can see it's just a little taller and about 3 times as thick, but this is a thin client PC that was built for silent, low-power operation. This, in theory, is a full mini ITX desktop with a discrete graphics card on it. So, and again, let's compare it to an optical drive, and you can really start to see the small scale come out of this thing. It is crazy small. But enough about the small stature of the case, let's talk about the hardware that's inside, and more importantly, how I wound up using that particular hardware. Well, this is the hardware that wound up working, and this is the pile of parts that I went through during testing. So you can see why I say this is one of the longest ongoing builds that I've ever embarked upon, not including the Cloud Gamer PC. Let's just start at the top of the pile and kind of quickly work our way down. Now, while the single PCI to dual PCI bridge is what I wound up going with, again, I was not able to use the second PCI slot, so I couldn't add in a second USB card or one of the 3 different sound cards that I tried using. I did try picking up a PCI Express to dual PCI bridge, which I had very high hopes for, but I had essentially the same exact problem with this as I did with the PCI card, and that is still kind of a mystery to me. Running PCI Express to a discrete chipset with dual PCI slots should have been a no-brainer, as all of the IRQ and memory resource conflicts that I was running into should have been handled by running on its own chipset. However, I ran into the exact same problems. That is, I can use one of the PCI slots, whether it be for video or audio cards, but I couldn't use both at the same time. And I even tried this 2 different ways, both with a PCI X1 as well as a mini PCI Express to dual PCI. Both of them wound up with the exact same problems. And don't think this is just a problem with Windows 98 or Millennium. I also tried running Windows XP on every single motherboard that you see here and wound up with the exact same problem every single time, regardless of the PCI splitter that I attempted to use. So while getting discrete video working was pretty simple, I couldn't get it working in conjunction with any of the 3 outboard audio cards that I tried, or even with a USB 2.0 controller. So what we're left with is essentially a PCI ribbon cable that happens to break out to 2 PCI slots, but only one of them is working. Other motherboards that I tried were a VIA IPA LN with a VIA C7 CPU on board. This one had the advantage of the Ethernet and onboard audio all working, but had the slowest CPU of the bunch with the VIA C7. Other motherboard contenders with low-power CPUs include the Intel D201GLY2, the Intel D525MW, as well as the ECS, God, what is this thing even? ET810402, which actually is the newest board of the bunch, complete with DDR3 memory compatibility and a PCI Express slot. All of these kind of failed all of the tests that I tried and were less stable than the D510 motherboard that I ended up going with. I also tried going with a full-fat desktop solution with a Z87 motherboard from MSI, as well as a Haswell i5-4440. If anything was going to ignore the PCI address conflicts, this would probably be it. Unfortunately, this had the same exact issues as the low-power boards that I tried. So, while I had to embrace DAT dongle life running USB audio and Ethernet, overall I am very impressed with the performance of this box, especially in Windows Millennium. While the GeForce 6200 that I used isn't going to set the world on fire by any means, given that it was manufactured in 2003, it also slaves for anything of this generation. Every single game that I tried to play, played at 60 FPS locked the entire time. This even includes some more recent titles, like Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, and Warcraft 3. So, what was it like diving back in time and playing retro games on fairly retro hardware? Well, take a quick look. So to set all of this up, I've been using this Philosophier 10 keyless mechanical keyboard, and while there's nothing wrong with it, it's also not necessarily period correct. And part of playing on original hardware, or close to original hardware, is playing with original peripherals. So I bought a couple brand new in-box original peripherals to go with my retro PC. Let's start with this box right here, which is a brand new IBM PS2 keyboard. Now, this is not a Model M or a Model F. It is just an IBM membrane keyboard, but it is brand new in the plastic. This is my first time breaking this out of the box. I have to say, that is gorgeous. So this is a KB0225. You know, that actually feels really good for a membrane keyboard. Man, they don't make them like this anymore. Oh, that feels good. For a membrane keyboard, this is quite responsive, I must say. So that's cool. But what about the mouse? Am I gonna go with some ball mouse or whatever else? No, I don't think so. As of 1999, I think I got my first optical mouse, and I figured I would go ahead and source as close as I could find to that original mouse, and that is going to be one of the first Microsoft optical mice. Now, this is a later model IntelliPoint, dating to 2003, if I recall correctly. So it does work with Windows XP, but it's also certified for 2000, Millennium 98, Windows NT, as well as Mac, so you could plug this into a Mac and it would work just fine. Again, this has not been opened or touched since it was brand new, so I am fairly excited. Hey, look at that. It comes with a USB to PS2 adapter, just in case you didn't have USB on your computer. Well, that is gorgeous. Very lightweight. Very, very lightweight. Those clicks aren't bad. I like those. And look at this, a scroll wheel. It's crazy. If the 90s agreed on anything, it's that everything should be beige. But it annoys the crap out of me that they couldn't decide on which color beige, because beige is a pretty wide spectrum. Oh well, it is what it is. All right, let's get my USB IntelliPoint set up here. I gotta say, that's taken me back. It's been too long since I've opened stuff like this. All right, so let's fire this thing up so you can see exactly what it looks like. Why am I not getting video output? Oh, come on. Don't play me like this. No, it's not gonna post. I mean, I have numlock. Boy, I wish I was making this up. What the hell? Yeah, I don't think this is posting. What the hell? The only thing I changed was the mouse and the keyboard. It's like I'm getting a post because my numlock works, which is usually a surefire sign that we at least got to the BIOS screen. All right, I think I figured this out. For some reason, with the IBM keyboard plugged into the PS2 port, this computer doesn't want to post. I'm not getting a video output from it. However, I can plug in the PS2 keyboard after it's turned on, and it will boot up into Windows, and then the keyboard works. This computer is not without its bugs. So, let's go ahead and give this a go, and I'll show you exactly what it looks like. Here we go. There's our post, Intel D510, 2 gigabytes of DDR2, 800 megahertz memory, Windows Millennium. That's right, Windows Me. Yeah, good stuff. All right, now I plug that in. I've got numlock. Hey, look at that, it works. Welcome to my Windows Millennium desktop. Again, as you can see, we've got the Intel Atom D510, 2 gigabytes of RAM, or just shy of it because you need to limit Windows Millennium to 1,992 megabytes to make it stable. If you go over that, it'll start to develop some memory issues and program compatibility problems. But this is a perfectly stable configuration. Take you over to the device manager really quick. The onboard VGA I was not able to fully disable on this motherboard, so it's still there and obviously doesn't work, but the GeForce 6200 is working just fine. There's also a single PCI USB controller on here. I'm not sure if that's a hub somewhere or whatever else, but all of the USB ports do work, including the USB 3.0, which I adapted to a 2.0 internal header, as well as the dual USB expansion card that I added in. Not really an expansion card, it's just, again, plugged into the onboard USB header, but that's what my sound is currently plugged into. So yeah, other than that, everything works, including some ICH 7 bus controller drivers that I had to download specifically for Windows 98 and Millennium. Everything is working. The library of games that I installed is fairly comprehensive for what you might expect out of this generation of computer. We've got Freelancer, Half-Life, the original Halo. I bet you didn't remember that that was written for Windows 98, because Windows XP wasn't out yet. We've got Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, Jedi Knight, Dark Forces 2. Yeah, don't get me started on the numbering scheme of that one. We've got all of the Microsoft fanfare. We've got Motocross Madness, Monster Truck Madness, Midtown Madness. The only thing I'm missing out of that collection is like Urban Chaos. I've got the original Hitman. I've got Diablo 2. I've got Crazy Taxi. Need for Speed from that generation, including the original Need for Speed Underground. Thief 1 and Thief 2, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, Warcraft 2 and 3, The Sims, Sim Theme Park. My entire growing up is now on this PC. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, but I don't think any computer from this generation was actually perfect. There's inherent problems with getting hardware to work with Windows 98, Windows Millennium, DOS, everything that goes with it. Does it work well? Yes, every single one of the games that you saw in that list is completely playable on this PC, and I could not be more happy as that was the result that I was setting out to achieve. As always, a full list of hardware for this build will be available down in the video description, complete with any affiliate links that I can provide. Them being affiliate links, I do get a small kickback if you buy from them, and I really appreciate you taking a look. On your way down there, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing to keep up with daily shenanigans like this. And if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, consider joining the Patreon. Link is also down in the video description. That's going to do it for me in this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Beer for today is from Deschutes Brewing Company over in Bend, Oregon. It is the Grower Direct IPA, and this one is featuring CLS Farms out of Yakima Valley. 7% ABV, 50 IBUs. Farmer's Market magic, proving the best IPAs come from growers you know. It is hoppy beer poetry. That is such a weird sentence. Very hop forward, right on the nose, but it's not this insanely dense, thick, dank smell. Nor is it this citrus bomb. It's kind of somewhere in the middle and a little bit more subdued. A little bit of lemon, a little bit of orange maybe. Pretty good. Whew. Much more intense on the flavor. That'll wake you up in the morning. This is an IPA that can kind of catch non-IPA drinkers off guard. It's one that it's like, that's very pleasant, almost like Pilsner-like in the aroma. And then you taste it and it is, whew, that is all hops. That being said, there's not a lot of evolution in the flavor here. You smell orange and lemon, and you taste orange and lemon. It's just a much more concentrated flavor in the glass rather than in your nose. This is not necessarily a beer that's well suited for colder weather. We're in the middle of winter right now. This is a beer that I'd much rather have on a hot summer day, late fall afternoon, that kind of thing. Very good. It's exactly what it says it is. It's single hop Grower Direct IPA. And it's not too bad.